90 minutes that we were in there and barricaded the doors, commenting as they did so that it would be quite lovely if the building caught on fire and none of us could get out. And the talk was interrupted by protesters who draped banners and who yelled from inside and sprinkled the crowd with water, I presume, while they walked out. And then afterwards, on the way back to my car, one of the main demonstrators from inside the crowd, a man who stood up in the middle of the talk and started to yell his own viewpoint, let's say, he was in my face, a foot and a half away from me, extremely aggressive and hostile as I walked for 2.5 blocks with my son beside me. And I had security guards from the campus with me, but they didn't have any idea what to do. They weren't trained for that sort of thing. And he was extremely aggressive and hostile. And I never came to any, he really did enrage me, particularly because my son was there, but also because of the way he was behaving, and he was so provocative. And at this same demonstration, one of the people pounding on the glass windows broke them and started to bleed, and the police arrested her later, and she had a garrote on her in her purse. And so...
A garrote?
Yes, it's like a rope that you would put around someone's neck, a string, a wire, a wire, yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it's not a defensive weapon. It's a murder weapon.
Whoa.
And, it was all in good fun, of course, except for the garrote, let's say. And so, but I should say, when I'm out in public, people are invariably extremely polite to me, and I've had virtually nothing but positive encounters with people on the street, and I never encountered anything that was dangerous on my tour. I went to about 160 cities, and there were crowds of anywhere between 2,000 and 10,000 people, and they all went very, very peacefully. And so I haven't worried about it. People have come to my home, but they've been okay so far. But I haven't worried about it, It's happened to me, but it hasn't made me afraid of being attacked. I think if I was attacked, then I'd be afraid of being attacked, But so far, that hasn't been a fear.
Did it damage your belief?
Well, look, last week, I was written into a comic book, Captain America comic book, by a radical leftist writer. I was written into the comic book as this magical super villain Nazi Red Skull, who's like the worst criminal in the whole Marvel comic universe. And that caused quite an uproar publicly and also in my household, because it was very stressful when it first occurred. I came across it on Twitter. Someone alerted me to the existence of the comic, and I looked into it and concluded, as this person did, that I was being parodied or slandered or, or accurately represented, I suppose, depending on your viewpoint. But those sorts of things throw me for a loop, and they certainly throw my whole family for a loop. It's very distressing to my wife and to my kids. And it's happened dozens and dozens of times. But each time it happens, we're aware that this could be the time where one of these slanderous mischaracterizations succeeds, in which case it's a complete catastrophe. We maneuvered our way through that, let's say, not around it, through it, very, very carefully, and I think very successfully. We produced, well, I won't go into the details, but then I talked to my wife, because I'm going to answer your question here. My wife afterwards, she said, I'd like some peace in our house. And I listened to her, she wants some peace, and she has gone through hellish health problems in the last couple of years. She was at death's doorstep for months on end, and amidst many other very complicated life events, let's say, happening at the same time. She said, I really want peace in my house, and this keeps happening. And I thought about that a lot. I mean, I think about it all the time, but, you know, peace is not that easy to attain. And she has children and she has grandchildren, and she wants peace for them too. And that means that not only does our household have to be peaceful, but so does our city and our country and Western society and hopefully the world. All of that, peace, you know? And so you can't just hide in your house and hope for peace. And she wasn't saying that. My wife isn't that naive by any stretch of the imagination. But I could hypothetically withdraw, although practically it's impossible because this is my life. And you can't just withdraw from your life. That isn't how life works. Practically, hypothetically, I could pull back, but that doesn't address the underlying problem. I mean, you know, I told you just at the beginning of this conversation that I talked to this young author, this heroic survivor, emigre from North Korea. You know, and I asked her specifically about her experience at Columbia University because she sacrificed so much to get there. I said, surely, and I meant this question genuinely, I said, surely, in the entire 4 years that you studied humanities at Columbia University, there must have been one class, there must have been one professor who rose up above the rest and taught you something of value, where you felt that you'd been enlightened and ennobled as a consequence of the teaching. You know, and she's read, she knows the difference between a high-quality book and a low-quality book. She was profoundly influenced by George Orwell's Animal Farm, and she couldn't bring a single class, course, or professor to mind. And so what does that have to do with peace? It's like, well, those institutions aren't functioning the way they used to. They've been taken over by an ideology that's resentful and shallow and bitter and wrong and based on lies. And there's no peace when that's happening.
Exactly.
So
I can see. So they say in the Netherlands, maybe also in Budo, they say the attack is the best defense to bring peace home. And that means go and live your passionate, purposeful, whatever the goal is. And my goal is to kill or to attack or to get onto and control depression. That's my goal. I lost my wife in '95 after she was kissing her kids goodbye. She jumped from 8 stories down, and there I was without money, with 4 children, alone, and heartbroken. And I came from there, from the darkness. Out of there, I began to do this cold training and these deep breathing exercises, and where psychiatry could not treat her with all injections, therapies, medicines and pills and all, I had to be there for my children. So I survived because of my children had to survive, and the cold water, it healed me. And now 20 years later, or 25 years later, or it was 3 years ago, in Detroit, near to Toronto, just over the border there, in Wayne State University with Professor Divakar and Professor Muzik, we showed in brain scans the ability to go into the deepest part of the brain, which was considered to be not done by humans, and robustly activate, say, the periaqueductal gray hemisphere, which is the place of the opioids and the cannabinoids and all the serotonin and dopamine, anything you need for feeling or regulating your mood in very stressful situations.
Central to pain control.
Yes, and for mood regulation. This is what they said, and they published it. This is psychology over physiology, which I want to give to you here as an entrance, sort of coming from nature. I'm a nature man. I look like a Timberlake. I go to the lake and I get it done, you know. That's me. But in the meanwhile, I'm thinking too. And I brought those thoughts to science. And appears to be that in nature are answers which we are not capable of finding within, say, city limits or in our comfort zone behavior. It had to be somebody who was hit so deeply with the love of his life, being gone, staying back, going into a intuitive practice that could still his mind, it was mine, because the only thing you can do when you go into the cold water is survive. It suddenly then disconnects from this internal agony, which is a heartbroken being, and why, all the time. That stopped. And it brought me, apparently, into this deep activation of deeper parts of the brain, which is also the seat of the emotion. And the emotion, when it is hurt, it should be healed. But we don't know in our society how to get there, because we always live in comfort zone behavior. What you did with your 12 rules, beyond order, and the first one is giving people a way to learn to control from within. And we came together the last time on the genomes, how to get into the genomes, which is connected with the deepest part of the brain, where we are able to learn how to deal with trauma, not only of this life, but also of past lives. This is total new science, but this is the way they published it in this paper. It says, now we have the compelling evidence of the key components of the autonomous processes in the brain related to mood regulation. So this is what we want, mood regulation within stressful situations. Could be being heartbroken, mental stress, bacterial stress, viral stress. Stress, in the end, is cell biological stress. And I come from nature. I go to brain scans. They take my blood, and I show we, as humans, have an innate capacity to deal with stress deeply. And
let me ask you about the cold, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, I'm still not operating optimally. I was diagnosed this month with central sleep apnea. So it turns out that I was waking up about 25 times an hour. And so now I'm using a breathing machine, and that's improved me from about 5% to about 50 or 60%. So it's transformed my life from impossible to just difficult. But I am using your cold exposure, and I want to ask you some specific questions about that, okay?
Yes.
So I stopped 2 weeks after we talked because I found, because my nervous system is damaged and hypersensitive, I'm hyperacute to stimulation in general, I found the cold exposure extremely aversive. I know people do, so, but it was aversive enough so that I stopped doing it. And even now, although I'm back doing it, I have been for 2 months, as I said, the water isn't ice cold. It's cold like a cold lake. It's not, I don't turn it all the way to cold, and it's still early enough in the year in Canada, so cold water would be, 4 degrees, 5 degrees Celsius, something like that. It'd be cold. I don't go all the way to cold, and
4 or 5 degrees is great.
Right, but I don't go that. I don't go that far down. I probably go to maybe 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or maybe.
So 10 degrees is great. Is great still. It is thermogenesis. We want to use the cold to make the body's physiology in the depth going to work. That's what is happening, and that's How crucial is the extreme cold? It's uncomfortable. The cold I expose myself to, it's cold. And it's enough to shock me into that deep breathing pattern, that kicks in right away when you jump into cold water. It's enough to shock me into that, although I'm also doing that voluntarily, and so that I do that for 30 inhalations and exhalations. Now, you just suggested, you did the last time we talked too, but you expanded the story, I believe, this time. You said